Hi there, Megan Thompson here, and we are going to talk about helping your sensitive kid take ownership of their behavior, specifically in terms of receiving constructive feedback regarding how they treat people, how they talk to people, and how they communicate in general. So, if you are noticing that your sensitive child who experiences the world in a different way, notices small details, pays attention to the emotions around others, experiences big, intense emotions, and deeply feels those emotions, and also can be easily overstimulated, then this show is for you. We are here to talk about the temperament trait of highly sensitive children. Sensory processing sensitivity is the clinical term used in the research, and this is different than sensory processing disorder. It's also different than autism, and it's different than ADHD, and it's also true that if we were to put all of these in a Venn diagram, parenting children with these needs, no matter the label that your child fits in the category, has the same root principle. So with our work, we help parents of highly sensitive kids eliminate daily meltdowns in as little as 8 weeks. And I have worked with parents who have hired me because their kid's having daily meltdowns, and they still don't truly fully understand the sensitivity of the child's temperament because their specialty is in finance or in tech or cybersecurity, or they studied English and majored in English and communications in their studies, and yet they decided to work with our team because we teach parents to eliminate daily meltdowns in healthy, effective, loving, communicative ways where limits and standards are part of the equation, and over talking and over explaining and being the only one that your kid can go to, or feeling fried and exhausted and yelling, is not part of the equation. So I've had friends hire me where they're like, you know what, you could explain it better than I can in terms of how my kid fits the entire temperament, and we no longer have meltdowns, so that's what matters to me. And then we've worked with parents who have received clinical diagnoses where their kid fits the criteria for level 1 autism, or been diagnosed with autism with a PDA label or an RSD label. And I'm not going to go on my soapbox that PDA is a ineffective label. You can watch a different show on that. And then also we've had parents who notice their child also fits the criteria for the highly sensitive trait and has ADHD. Listen, nervous system intensity is nervous system intensity, and when your child is fried from life because they don't have emotion regulation skills, you need to parent differently. Point blank, period, end of story. Okay? So that's what this show is all about, especially if your child's having meltdowns on a daily, multiple times a day basis, or multiple times a week basis above the age 4. So if your child is having daily meltdowns age 4 or under, and their meltdowns are lasting about 5 minutes long, max 10, but not 10 every day. I mean, can you imagine your kids screaming 10 minutes straight every single day, hitting, kicking, screaming, yelling, throwing their body on the floor, crying profusely for 10 straight minutes, their little 4-year-old body? That is too much for them. Their nervous system's overloaded, okay? Their bodies, how their body experiences sensations and takes in information, including your words. If they can't take it in and settle down in under 10 minutes, even if they're 3 and 4, then something's up, right? So again, daily meltdowns could still very well be developmentally appropriate for 4-year-olds, but I'm talking about they cried and they stomped their foot, and that happens on a daily basis. And occasionally, a couple times a week, they just lose it, body on the floor, melting. It's developmentally appropriate for a 4-year-old, right? Length of time, we look at length of time, we look at intensity. Are they threatening to hurt you? Are they threatening to hurt themselves? Are they saying life would be better off without them? Or they hate you? Children don't use that language if they have emotion management skills. So here's the deal. Even sensitive children don't use language like that if they are communicating effectively and they know how to do that. So I want you to understand that raising a sensitive child does not need to include your kids saying, I hate you, you don't love me, life would be better off without me, all of that. So if you're in communities where people are like, yeah, my kid does that too, they'll eventually grow out of it, go away from that community. That is not the community that you need to get your research from, because that is not developmentally appropriate and you need professional guidance at this point. Same thing goes to those of you listening whose children are struggling beyond age 4 with all these behaviors that I demonstrated. None of this is appropriate unless your child is running from a bear. They should not be hitting, kicking, screaming, running away, and slamming doors. If your child is responding to you because it's homework time, or because they don't get cookies before dinner, or because their best friend next door said that they don't like them, and that's how they're responding, then your child is not responding in a developmentally appropriate way, and they are struggling to manage their own emotions, and they don't have skills, and they need to learn those skills through you. Your relationship has the highest leverage, has the highest trust, has the highest love than in any other relationship that they have. Even if you currently have already tried therapy, feel exhausted on a daily basis, wake up in the morning wondering or walking on eggshells and feeling dread and wishing things were easier and feeling guilty about that. Even if that's going on in your loving relationship with your kid, you are still the highest and best change agent for your kid. So buckle up, Buttercup. We're going to talk about this. Last week's show was much longer than today's is planned to be, because I am running a series right now on responsibility and ownership, because it's September and everybody is working on schedules and routines and transitions and homework and thinking that that's coming along down the pike, depending on when your child started the school season and their educational plans and getting work done, right? Whether you homeschool or you send your kid to private school or your kid is in public school system in any country, we have got you covered on this topic. And I want to cover a few things. Really, a lot of this is going to be the internal experience and the relational experience and what's needed for your child to be able to take ownership for their behavior, and what questions you might be having when your child is stuck with not taking ownership for their behavior. Saying things like, "You're mean, mommy," when you tell them what you just did is not appropriate and we don't talk to each other like that in this home. Clear and concise language, not necessarily exactly what I teach, but not going to kill your kid if they hear it, right? So not necessarily wrong, but your child isn't receiving it well. So you might be thinking the way you demonstrated it or the way you delivered what your kid, the feedback to your kid has to be changed. That's not where we change it. We change how you understand, how your child's taking in the information. And then you get to change your words. So then they land better because they started in your mind and in your heart differently. And then your child receives them differently, even if you're not perfect, because no parent is. So that's the process we teach. And that's the process we're going to cover on today's show. The assumptions we're going to make on today's show is that you're working from your own heart, that your child is doing the very, very best they can and they can do better. And you are doing the best way you can and you can do better. And we're not falling in victimhood or helplessness or fear and frustration and overwhelm as your own mental state. And if you're able to do that, then great. You can take this show and the advice I'll cover here and run with it and probably transform your life without even having a conversation with my team and or working with us directly. And if you're stuck, then we got you too. Okay, great. So let's go. First things first, you need to assume, decide, presume, educate yourself on the fact that your child is naturally more empathetic than the other 80% of the population. And feeling empathy is different than demonstrating empathy, because often what parents ask themselves, and I've heard this countless times, even ran into someone in my new neighborhood who said the same thing. I secretly wonder sometimes the way my kid talks to me or the way my kid interacts with the world, am I raising a sociopath? That thought crosses a lot of parents of sensitive kids' minds, and you don't have to own it. And that doesn't mean that the dynamic you're having in your household is what you need to put up with or keep. Okay. When I say put up with, I mean, that don't use that as vindication to be rude or mean or pressured to your kid. Okay. But I want you to understand that your standards can shift if your child is struggling and using aggressive, pressured, intense language. Obviously, you can't model that to your kid and expect them to not demonstrate it too, right? And so we're going to talk about that, but I talk about that a lot. So we're going to focus on the first thing. You have to notice no child was put on this earth to be miserable. Assumption number one. Assumption number two, your kid is doing the best they can and they can do better. Assumption number three, your child is more empathetic than the average kid, than 80% of the population, because sensitive kids make up 1 out of every 5. That's 20%. All right. And so what that means is that they are more empathetic. If your child is not demonstrating empathy, that means they are not acting in their true nature. And that means something's up that you need to address. Now is the time. Okay. Just like if your kid wasn't walking at developmentally appropriate standards, you would take them to a physical therapist or the pediatrician to assess, or an occupational therapist. Okay. So, or a surgeon, God forbid. Right. So notice that. Notice that if your child fits this temperament and they're not performing, meeting developmentally appropriate milestones for their temperament, then something's up. Something's wrong. Okay. Doesn't mean your kid's broken, but it does mean you need to fix something in your parenting strategy. That's number one. Number two, you need to observe what is developmentally appropriate behavior. And I want to put a plug in here because 2 years ago, CDC changed standards for developmentally appropriate behavior in 2022 and reduced standards for talking, walking, and social interactions. Removed, and lengthened the amount of time that it's considered normal. So I do not advise that you follow those rules. Don't look up the 2022 standards. Look up the pre-2022 standards if you can find them on Google to observe normal, typical, developmentally appropriate kid communication, capacity. They removed crawling. There are so many. Anyways, crazy time. I'm going to stop because my brain just did that angry man in Inside Out, that movie where like fire shot out on government standards for children and why what we do with our kids can't be in following the U.S. government, because a lot of what the U.S. government sets up for kids actually sets them up for failure. And I mean, the public school system's disaster, like all this stuff, right? So as a whole, I'm not saying that there aren't some great public schools, but I digress. So the situation that we're in at this point with your kid, you particularly, how your kid learns, how they interact with other people, how they communicate, needs to be held to the same developmental standards as everyone else in the room. All right? That's important. When I say developmental standards, I mean looking up the research, okay? Look at pre-2022 developmentally appropriate standards. That means that children at age 6 should not be hitting on a regular basis, and up, 6 and up. Definitely not having meltdowns after the age of 4 at all, unless it's like the worst case scenario, like you would have a meltdown as an adult if your loved one died, right? Like you would lose it, screaming, crying, body on the floor. Totally appropriate grief. Your kid learning that they have homework due tomorrow and they forgot, not appropriate grief. Okay. So just so that we're clear here, we've got standards. And then the emotional intensity, okay, has to be shifted. And the language that your kid uses to talk about themselves and to talk about other people. So if they're using words like hate or words like stupid or words like can't or won't as what comes out of their mouth when they're upset, that means that their identity, how they perceive themselves, their self-concept is off. It's not on target. It's not developmentally on target. How do I know this? I have a license. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor. I don't think you can see this. Whatever. My license is over there on the bookshelf. I've been doing this for 15 years in the clinical setting, postmasters. Okay. So the next thing that I want you to understand is that you need to observe whether or not your child is capable right now of demonstrating humility. The ability to apologize requires one to be present to the moment enough to register information. If your child is so stressed out that they are mentally blocking out the details, then they are not going to be able to accept responsibility or ownership for their behavior that they just demonstrated. Last week's show was on responsibility for tasks and like taking ownership for getting the job done and transitioning appropriately for school and changes in schedule, changes in routine. This week, we're talking about emotional ownership. When I was little, I was taught forced apologies. Say you're sorry. How dare you? And there was a flavor of that parenting style that perpetuated shame, and shame creates shutdown. And so it made it very hard for me to accept responsibility growing up. In relationships, like my first boyfriend, for example, and this was in college, late bloomer. And in that dynamic, I could not apologize. Like I never did. I did some not cool, embarrassing stuff in that relationship. And refused to apologize. Not because he asked me directly to apologize, but internally, I always had an excuse. There was always a reason for me to not be a nice person. And that's not cool. I was not demonstrating humility. I was very prideful. And the reason was because I had to protect my view of myself because it was very fragile, extremely fragile self-concept. On the surface, 4.0 GPA in grad school, right? And obviously that was so very high GPA in undergrad, performing well, running like sorority leadership roles and engaging in extracurricular service-based stuff and, having a good time and had friends who cared about me and I cared about them and I did nice things for them, right? So demonstrating social care. I wasn't a sociopath, still not, thank God, not a sociopath, and yet could not handle accepting responsibility and taking ownership of my behavior to the point where I gave an apology. Why? Because I was taught to preserve myself alone. Okay. Children who learn that they have to handle themselves because they are not feeling connected and they don't feel like they can communicate or that they're heard and understood by their parents purely by a mismatch in parenting style and parenting approach, don't take ownership for their behavior. So let this be your call to action, to take action on shifting your parenting style. Go to meganthompsoncoaching.com/3 mistakes. Oops, wrong thingy. Here, okay? And learn how most parents get stuck in stopping the meltdown cycle and digest the content there. It's a full training. It's over an hour, right? You have an opportunity to listen to where parents need to shift. Well-meaning, compassionate parents who are focused on building emotional intelligence and emotion regulation skills still get stuck on this problem. And if that's you, free training for you. Go ahead, register. Look forward to seeing you there, okay? And we can help you. We can help you to change this dynamic. If you want to learn more about the principles and standards that myself and my team hold, I'm thinking about this. Put the comments in the chat or let us know via email. If you receive this by email, let us know on any of the channels, wherever you're finding us. Comment in the chat below. If you want to learn more about how standards need to have a baseline and our opinion on what baseline needs to be and where sensitive kids fall on that baseline, even neurodivergent kids fall on that baseline, and how we can help sensitive children and neurodivergent children reach their fullest potential, I would be thrilled to have a guest podcast where my team and I riff on this topic. But I want to know your questions. All right, let's have this conversation. So reach out, mt@meganthompsoncoaching.com, send me an email, ask your question in the comment below of wherever you find this video in the show. And obviously, if you're watching the podcast, register for the training and you'll get all kinds of emails from me that are helpful. And then let me know if you want the next episode to be on that, or one of our latest episodes to be on this topic, and we can do a deep dive. Okay, like I said, I promised you that this would be short. Talk soon. Bye.